Entre preciosos palmares se oyen los tiernos cantares que salen de tu voz.
Tienes sabor, sabor, sabor y nada más. Tienes sabor, sabor, sabor y nada más.
Cuando en La Habana me oyeron lo dulce que yo cantaba, cantores se aproximaban hasta que cantar me vieron. Uno a otro se dijeron: esta nena no es de aquí. Y yo, que nunca me escondo, les dije de buena gana: soy Omar Portuondo de Cayo Hueso, La Habana.
Tienes sabor, sabor, sabor y nada más. Tienes sabor, sabor, sabor y nada más.
Pinté a Matanzas confusa la cueva de Bellamar, pero me faltó pintar el nido de la lechuza. Yo pinté por donde cruza un bello ferrocarril, un machete, un fusil, una lancha marinera y no pinté.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, your host. Thank you for listening today. Today's date is Saturday, May 30th, 2026. The time is 6 p.m. and I am in Miami-Dade County, Florida. The title of today's lecture is MK Ultra Part 7, the Harold Blauer Saga, Further U.S. Army and CIA Misadventures in Germ Terror. And ladies and gentlemen, I tend to do these lectures outdoors, so I may have to raise or project my voice in order to drown out the background noise. Please adjust your volumes accordingly, and thank you for listening. So, ladies and gentlemen, in my fairly in-depth journey into the MK Ultra mechanism and its obvious influence on present-day gang stalking, I've come across many extraordinary names in the MK Ultra discussion. There's Admiral Stansfield Turner, who was the director of the CIA in the 70s. All of this fell down on his shoulders. He had to go in front of Congress time and again, atoning for the misgivings that the American CIA used when experimenting on U.S. citizens in the name of biomedical research, germ research, biohazardous research, biochemical research, human experimentation research. All of these things were the objectives, the goals that the CIA intended on meeting during the MK Ultra fiasco. And the reason I call it a fiasco, ladies and gentlemen, is because I'm not sure that the United States is any better off 75 years later than it was when these programs were implemented. Ladies and gentlemen, I see no tangible benefit or value having been created from mass experimentation on United States citizens in a secret, hidden, or covert capacity, I don't see how the U.S. has benefited. I don't see how the American people have benefited. I don't see how the global community has benefited from MK Ultra. As far as I'm concerned, it was a worthless program. It did not do anything to advance the interests of civil society. And it didn't make our national security mechanism safer. It didn't make our armed services personnel safer. It didn't make our local law enforcers, state and federal law enforcers safer. It didn't make the American people safer. But it did result in a whole bunch of Americans, in the hundreds of thousands, getting high off LSD courtesy of the CIA. All right? Experimentation sometimes have blind subjects, ladies and gentlemen. Not everyone who was the subject of a MK Ultra experiment knew that they were a subject of the MK Ultra experiment. They were just selected. Okay, you turn your head, an agent just might throw 70 micrograms of LSD in your coffee, or your orange juice, or your glass of milk, or your Coca-Cola. You're at a family barbecue. Maybe you have a Budweiser beer can open. You set it down next to you. You turn your back for a second. An agent walks up and throws 70 micrograms of LSD in your beer. You go and drink it, and you start hallucinating real bad. The CIA wanted to collect data on what you act like when you're hallucinating, and what the people around you act like when they see you hallucinating. Okay? Remember Frank Olson, ladies and gentlemen, a Army biomedical researcher who was experimented on by another doctor, a man by the name of Sidney Gottlieb. Dr. Olson was at a convention of Army researchers. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was the chief doctor of MK Ultra, was there. And he saw Dr. Frank Olson from across the room. And Dr. Sidney Gottlieb looked at him and said, "Wow, there he is, Dr. Frank Olson himself. How about that? A renowned biomedical researcher for the United States of America, its government. Well. I, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, also work for the United States federal government." Keep in mind, these are Sidney Gottlieb's thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. I, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, am also a renowned biomedical researcher. But little does Dr. Frank Olson know, I, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, work for the CIA in that capacity. I'm a doctor and a CIA researcher. I outrank him. And I'm the head doctor in the MK Ultra program that is being run by the CIA. I'm Dr. Gottlieb. And I'm going to run an experiment right now, right there, right here in this very room, on that man, Dr. Frank Olson. And that's what he did, ladies and gentlemen. When Frank Olson poured a glass of liquor, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb saw the opening. He saw the opportune moment to throw 70 micrograms of LSD in Dr. Olson's glass of liquor when Dr. Olson had his back turned or had stepped away for a second. Then Dr. Gottlieb turned his back, walked to the other side of the room, and acted like nothing happened. And apparently none of the other doctors in the room in this convention saw what happened. They were all preoccupied. So when Dr. Olson came back, he drank his liquor as usual, and that was pretty much the end of Dr. Frank Olson. Over the next 8 days, he slowly started losing his mind because of the chemical complexities of LSD on his body, on his brain. And approximately 10 days after he ingested the LSD, he had completely lost his mind, and he jumped off the 10th story balcony of the Statler Hotel in New York while he was seeking treatment for the damage to his brain that the other doctor, Sidney Godelev, caused him when he threw the drug in his drink. Now, Dr. Olson left behind a wife and 3 kids, and they eventually sued the U.S. federal government. They got $750,000 for it, which for me is that's on the low end of the spectrum for such an incident. But at some point, the President of the United States, I think it was Jimmy Carter, had to apologize to the Olson family personally through a typed letter that the President sent the Olson family lawyer, and the Olson family lawyer gave the letter to the Olson family. And this is not a terribly well-known story, ladies and gentlemen. The Frank Olson story. Look it up in your spare time for more details. It's just something I would have never known about if it wasn't for the retrieval of documents, declassified documents online. Ladies and gentlemen, that happened here in the United States. All right, I'm not talking about something that happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I'm talking about right here in the sovereign territorial entity known as the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, MK Ultra ran from approximately 1950 to 1970. That's 20 years of experiments on the American people, many of which who did not know they were being experimented on. Ladies and gentlemen, there are many similar tales to be told about CIA and U.S. Army experimentation on people. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's clarify who and what we're talking about here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, of course, not all CIA operatives or agents or executives know or have known about experimentations that have taken place in the United States. They may know some about these programs and projects, but not everything. They don't know everything. They allow their departments some autonomy and sovereignty. So the Technical Services Division and the Special Operations Division and all these special operations departments that are in the U.S. Army and the CIA, they got together on this and said, we can find out more about human behavior than anyone has ever done before. Okay, we can find out more about human behavior in 20 years than every psychologist in the country combined can do over the next 100 years. By the end of this project, MK Ultra, we are going to know so much about human behavior that the United States will never have to fear anybody ever again. Because we'll know so much about the human mind, about the human body, and about human motivations that all of our questions concerning the mysteries of human abilities will be solved. And we can do it all in secret. All we have to do is document the experimentation and exchange them on documents. The only people that need to know something are the director himself and the assistant director. We'll fill them in on some of this. But the more controversial matters, for example, the injection of people with foreign substances to see what their reaction will be, that's all just going to be between the TSA and the SOD. We're not going to let the director and all the high-ranking officials know about this. We're going to conduct these experiments the way we want to and when we want to and on whoever we want to. Doesn't matter who they are. Okay, this was the mindset of the CIA. This was the mindset of the U.S. Army. And of course, not all U.S. Army personnel, not all U.S. Army staffers are in league with human experimentation. Of course not. Of course not. There are special operations divisions in the U.S. Army, too, that do plainclothes operations in urban settings or suburban settings, even rural settings. There are staged events happening all across this country, ladies and gentlemen, all across this country. And today, we're going to talk about Harold Blauer, who was one such experiment. Harold Blauer was at one time in his life a professional tennis player who won four out of 6 matches. And which is a fairly short career, but he apparently won the National Professional Doubles Championship with Charles M. Wood in 1936. So when Harold Blauer was 26 years old, he was actually a tennis champion. But when he was about 45 years old, he was experimented on by the CIA and killed with a mescaline injection. So we're going to talk about Mr. Harold Blauer today. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that this man's story deserves some attention. Even all these years after he passed away. Okay, this deserves some attention, ladies and gentlemen. It deserves quite a bit of attention. I mean, he died in 1953. Okay, 73 years ago, this man was experimented on by the CIA and perished during some sort of a psychiatric evaluation. So he died at the age of 43. This former tennis champion. He passed away at the tender age of 43 years old. Because our CIA wanted to experiment on this man. This story, it deserves a look. Okay. And the reason I think it deserves a look, ladies and gentlemen, is because this man was obviously selected for this experiment. No one knows how, no one knows the mechanisms. Why was this former tennis champion selected for human experimentation? Why? How How crazy was he to need that psychiatric evaluation in the first place? I mean, was Harold Blauer just that nutty at the age of 43? Just 17 years after having won a national doubles championship? So from the time he won that championship to the time he was 43, that 17-year gap, he just went crazy somehow. That's bizarre, ladies and gentlemen. And he found himself in a psychiatric hospital. And the doctors belonged to the CIA. And they said, wow, this man is really nutty. Let's inject him with some mescaline. And see how his body and mind react to it. So they injected him a bunch of times, ladies and gentlemen, a bunch of times. They injected a ton of mescaline into this guy. I mean, and what I'd like to do is look at some documents that I have here on Mr. Harold Blauer. The first thing we're going to read is all right, we're going to read from the Above the Law section of the Freedom magazine, which is the magazine that's published by the Church of Scientology. This article was written by Thomas G. Whittle, and we're going to read this article's comments on the Harold Blauer situation. We'll start at the very bottom, right next to the quotation, "If every government official, those who perform these often fatal experiments upon innocent and unknowing victims have shown a bizarre detachment from any responsibility for the effect of their actions. Elizabeth Barrett, a daughter of Harold Blauer, was 13 when her father was killed. She told Freedom when he got that last injection, he had violent, life-threatening reactions for at least 15 minutes before they made any move whatsoever to try and help him. They just stood there and watched as if saying, oh, he's dying, isn't that interesting?" One of the psychiatrists involved in the CIA experiments involving Blauer, James Cattell, later remarked, "We didn't know whether it was dog piss or what it was we were giving him." So I'm going to stop there, ladies and gentlemen. What that last comment meant was that the doctors that were involved in this experiment, they didn't know what substance the CIA had given them to test on Harold Blauer. They had no idea, the doctors. This was just as much an experiment for them as it was for Harold Blauer. It was just as much of an experiment for Harold Blauer as it was for the CIA. All three parties, the CIA, the doctors, and Harold Blauer, had no clue, no idea, no concept at all of what was contained in these injections. Okay? None of them knew what the effect would be. The only people that had some semblance of what was in that needle was the CIA. They knew it was a mescaline derivative. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a shame that that's how that man lost his life. I mean, you don't have to be a doctor or you don't have to be a doctor or even a champion tennis player to see that such a horrible mishap should never happen in American hospitals. I think that is I think that's something that goes without saying typically. There's just no place for human experimentation in American hospitals, period. There's no place for human experimentations outside of hospitals as well. There's no place for human experimentation anywhere at all, as far as I can tell. I mean, there are too many ways to, if you want to do experiments on people, there are ways to do it legally. You have to get a consent from the person. They have to be documented as physiologically able to withstand the experiment. You got to pay them for their time, and you have to give clear ideas as to what the experiment's about, what its goals are, who the doctors in the experiment are, what they're going to be using as far as their experimental test subjects. And there's going to have to be a specific time frame as to how long the experiment's going to last. So there's a lot of red tape that needs to be observed in order to experiment on people. But apparently the CIA wanted to skip these mechanisms and procedures and just experiment on people out in the open, out in their daily lives. And that was some of what we I have seen with Project MK Ultra, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'd like to do here is I'd like to read a Los Angeles Times article with it's got a date of May 6, 1987. So this was about 35 years after the death of Frank Olson. This was about 35 years after Frank Olson's death. The U.S. government finally settled a lawsuit with his family. I mean, it took a really long time to settle that lawsuit because it was very controversial. It was very controversial. So they drugged the lawsuit out 35 years. And then what they did was they said, all right, we're going to give you 700,000 big ones. Right? So they gave the man's estate $700,000 35 years after he was killed in a CIA experiment. Ladies and gentlemen. I mean, think about it, ladies and gentlemen. In 35 years, I mean, you could have made way more than $700,000 just working a regular job. But 35 years passed and the federal government settled with Harold Blauer's estate. And the amount of $700,000. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm sure it helped out. But it was 35 years after the man died. I mean, there just wasn't much of a sense of urgency to get these people paid. But I do know that this Harold Blauer matter was looked at by the Supreme Court at some point. That could, I mean, that could prolong things. I mean, Supreme Court opinions can take years to manifest. In this case, went to the Supreme Court. So I'm sure that slowed things down a little bit. But anyhow, we're going to read this article. It's a New York Times article. And the title is $700,000 awarded to a state of Army drug test victim. And it's imported from the Associated Press. A judge ruled Tuesday, and this is in New York City, that the government negligently caused and then covered up its role in the death of a mental patient who was given hallucinogenic drugs in secret Army experiments during the 1950s. This judge, awarded this man's estate more than $700,000 in damages. In a sharply worded 106-page opinion, U.S. District Judge Constance Baker Motley, U.S. District Judge Constance Baker Motley detailed what she called a 20-year conspiracy by the Army, the Justice Department, and the New York State Attorney General's office to conceal the events surrounding the death of Harold Blauer. So I'll stop right there just for a second. So this judge found evidence that the Army, the Department of Justice, and the State Attorney General's office concealed the events. They tried to cover it up. What the CIA did to Harold Blauer in that mental hospital. They're trying to cover it up. And the judge is writing an opinion about it. And it goes to show that in some of these government experiments, the people involved don't want it to get out. They don't want it to get out. Because it could make them look bad. They know what they're doing could make them look bad, but they do it anyway because they think they're going to get away with it. Okay? So, we're going to continue. It continues, Motley in awarding $702,000 to Blauer's estate said he died as a guinea pig in an experiment to test potential chemical warfare agents for the U.S. Army. Assistant U.S. Attorney Beth Caswan, who represented the government, said her office was reviewing the ruling and would have to consult Justice Department and Army officials in Washington before deciding whether to appeal. So we'll stop there before we go to the next section. So essentially this judge, a very conscientious judge, her name was U.S. District Judge Constance Baker Motley. She awarded in a civil case $702,044 to the Harold Blauer estate. And she said that he died as a guinea pig in an experiment to test potential chemical warfare agents for the U.S. Army. A U.S. district judge said that in open court. I like that, ladies and gentlemen. I'll say it again. And this word guinea pig is a euphemism for an experiment. Why do they call people who are experiments, why do they call them guinea pigs? Because typically when scientists, biologists, want to, in decades past, when they wanted to run an experiment on a living thing, they'd find a mouse or a rat or a raccoon or a chicken or a guinea pig or a possum or an ape or a dog or a cat. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, guinea pigs were very popular among the science community because you could buy lots of them for cheap. So if somebody says you're a guinea pig or I'm a guinea pig, they're talking about you are being experimented on as a guinea pig would, the animal, the guinea pig, in scientific experiments on living things. So she said, this U.S. district judge said that he died as a guinea pig in an experiment to test potential chemical warfare agents for the U.S. Army. So she basically laid it down bare in her judicial opinion, and she wrote a 106-page report on this, which I may review it at some point in the future, on what she found out about Harold Blauer's death, that it was not only an illegal experiment, it was not only what caused the man's death, it was covered up and hidden by the actors in that death. And once the truth was brought to light, this judge wrote a scathing 106-page report. On what she saw. So, we're going to move to the next section, mescaline derivatives. Blauer, 42 years old, a tennis pro, died on January 8th, 1953 from one in a series of mescaline derivatives he was given at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, the ruling said. The drugs were administered to Blauer as a part of a classified contract the state-run institute had with the Army Chemical Corps for evaluating the effects of potential chemical warfare agents. Blauer was admitted voluntarily to the institute in December of 1952, suffering from severe depression after a divorce. He was later diagnosed as a pseudo-neurotic schizophrenic, but was responding to therapy. When Blauer died, he was scheduled to be released in a matter of weeks. Motley wrote, although he knew that he was receiving experimental drugs, he certainly had no idea he was being used in an experiment to develop chemical warfare agents, the judge wrote. When Blauer died, he was scheduled to be released in a matter of weeks. His medical records were tampered with, trial evidence showed. They made it appear that Blauer's death, while triggered by the injection, was really caused by a weak heart. Elizabeth Barrett, 46, of Manhattan, Blauer's eldest daughter, launched a series of suits against the government and numerous federal and state employees. 3 suits were consolidated and went to trial before Motley last October. So his daughter was likely the beneficiary of all of those proceeds. And you can see they tried to cover it up. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a program that aimlessly bashes the United States or any particular person. Okay, I'm critical because I know some of what is happening and is not being remedied. Now, if you ask me, do I typically think we have a competent president of the United States, a competent vice president, a competent attorney general candidates, a competent Department of Justice, a competent Department of Defense, a competent Congress, a competent governors, mayors, city council members, state representatives, state senators, and the like? I would tell you yes. I believe that the people that we have at the helms of government are competent people. But I think when you're talking about the capacity to experiment on U.S. citizens, a very competent elected official, a very competent judge, a very competent group of people that look into matters like this, even the FTC, okay, the Federal Trade Commission, it's got competent people in it as well. People miss things. Maybe the situation was just overlooked. Maybe it was missed, but maybe it was hidden from the Senate. The Senate Select Committee had no idea that the CIA was running programs like this on people, or experiments like this. So there's a lot to be unpacked with respect to who was closest to the matter, who could have prevented it, and why didn't they? All right. Although we have lots of competent people in various governmental roles in this country, things can be missed. Excuse me. Things can be missed. Ladies and gentlemen, what this story shows, if any, is that it is very much within a government's power to experiment on its citizens. It's very much in a government's power. It's not difficult at all. If you use your armed services, if you use your federal law enforcement agent or auxiliary, if you use doctors and hospitals, if you use plainclothes civilian type spies, in a very sophisticated, very synchronized experimentation protocol, it's not difficult at all so long as everyone does their role. Gang stalking would be easy to set up. We've already seen it happen once in East Germany in the 70s, 80s, and 90s under the Stasi-Schutzstaffel, or the Stasi's Zersetzung program. Something like gang stalking has already existed. It ended in 1990 in East Germany. 36 years later, it's manifested here in the United States. Okay, and it's just that simple. So here's what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to look at some documents that I found. These are some AI documents that I found on this topic. They're courtesy of Google, and they are summaries of an aggregation of data and information from several websites into paragraphs that are displayed on screen. Harold Blauer, born in 1910, died January 8, 1953, was an American professional tennis player whose life was tragically cut short when he became the unwitting victim of a secret military mind control experiment. He died after being injected with a massive overdose of a synthetic drug at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, a casualty of the Cold War-era Project Artichoke. Project Artichoke was very much a part of MK-Ultra. The details of his life, his tragic death, and subsequent decades-long legal cover-up outline a dark chapter in American history. And you'll notice here that it says that the cover-up, the experiment, and the outcome of the experiment were tragic and a dark chapter in American history. That should tell you right there what a program like gang stalking is capable of doing to the image and reputation of the United States. I don't want to see that happen. I think the people in the United States that are good outweigh the number of people in the United States that are bad. And I think there's more good about the United States than there is bad. But I'm going to say this, that this gang stalking mechanism that's been unleashed on American society, it has the capacity to make America look worse of a country than it is. Okay? I don't believe that such a program could exist and just nobody in the United States governmental capacity care or be up to the challenge of facing it, analyzing it, apologizing to the victims, and eradicating the program and then moving forward in a better America. I believe it's within the capacity of every elected official, every judge, and every investigator in the country to have that care about the United States, its future, its heritage, its image. But ladies and gentlemen, if this gang stalking program continues to operate unchecked, it threatens to harm all of that, even America's legacy on the world stage. All right, is gang stalking an atrocity? Yes. Yes, it is. Is it a human rights violation? Yes, it is. Okay, and the subject of this experiment is never told that they're going into this experiment called Project Gang Stalking. It's just one day they wake up and they start seeing synchronized activity. And this synchronized activity is perpetrated against them by their fellow Americans who correspond with one another using a signaling mechanism that resembles physical gestures, bodily gestures, sounds, verbal commands, and vehicular maneuvers that are aimed at pointing out the target. This program, like MK Ultra, threatens to harm the image and reputation of the United States. And it says right here that this was a dark chapter in American history. MK Ultra was a dark chapter in American history. Okay, just like the Zersetzung was a dark chapter in East German history, and gang stalking is a dark chapter in American history. Okay, it is another failed covert human experimentation program that federal auxiliaries have unleashed upon American society. And there's already a program in place to stifle the discussion. And the most prevalent of these narratives is the people coming forward about gang stalking they're psychotic, they're schizophrenic, they're demented. And not only are they crazy, but how dare they come forward with this information knowing it could make America look bad? But ladies and gentlemen, I cannot preoccupy myself with what anyone foreign or domestic, and when I say foreign or domestic, I'm talking anyone in this world, has to say about my or any target individual's mental state. One second, please. I can't get too involved in that, what they think. I have a job to do, and I will continue to do that job as the president and sole proprietor of EIS Media Group, Bible Discourses LLC, and as the host and cultivator of the EIS Media Group lecture series. And that job is to shed a light on clandestine gang stalking, period. And how it has affected society, how it's affected history, how it's affected the economy. I mean, just think of it. If you put enough people in a gang stalking campaign, it's going to be pretty difficult for them to go to work. That drives up the unemployment rate. Because if you're a TI, a targeted individual, you are going to experience workplace mobbing while you're at work. And it's going to harm your chances of advancing in the company and increase your chances of getting fired or you resigning. So if you put enough people in a gang stalking campaign, that means they can't get to work. They can't do their jobs right because they're being descended on by a pack of gang stalkers, some of which are co-workers. Ladies and gentlemen, there are enough people that know gang stalking and its mechanisms in the American workplace to know when they're all about to gang up on somebody. And when they decide to, it's the TI versus them and their tricks. So what we're going to do is we're going to look some more at the early life and career of Harold Blauer. As a professional athlete, Blauer was a successful professional tennis player and instructor. Throughout the 1930s, he actively competed across the American national tennis circuit. He lived in Locust Valley, Long Island, and was married to Amy Blauer, with whom he had two daughters, Elizabeth and Belinda. And here's some more about his life. The admission to the Psychiatric Institute. He had a bout with depression following a painful divorce from his wife. Blauer began struggling with severe depression and tension. He voluntarily checked himself into the New York Psychiatric Institute in early December of 1952, seeking professional help with his depression. The hospital staff offered him an experimental injection-based program for his depression. That was offered to him by the doctors at the direction of the CIA. When Blauer hesitated, he was allegedly threatened with being permanently locked away in a mental institution if he did not cooperate. So apparently, when Harold Blauer checked himself into the Psychiatric Institute, they offered him this injection-based experimental medicine. He was hesitant to allow them to experiment on him, and then they threatened him with being permanently locked away in a mental facility if he did not comply. So he was coerced into this, and the next section of this AI-generated summary is the fatal experiment. It says that secret military contracts were put together, and unbeknownst to Blauer, the hospital was under a secret contract with the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. The military was using civilian patients to test the toxicity of various chemical warfare and interrogation agents, a precursor to the infamous MK Ultra program. So, the U.S. Army Chemical Corps, went into these contracts with hospitals around the country. The New York State Psychiatric Institute was one of the hospitals that the U.S. Army's Chemical Corps went into a contract with. And basically this contract was one that allowed the CIA or the U.S. Army's Chemical Corps to give experimental drugs and chemicals to this psychiatric institute to give to their patients, and then the data that was collected by the doctor from the experiment was sent back to the U.S. Army Chemical Corps for evaluation. So there were a lot of chemical warfare and interrogation chemicals that were being given to Harold Blauer in this mescaline derivative. And ladies and gentlemen, they actually tested chemical warfare agents on this guy. As he was seeking psychiatric treatment. So the next paragraph is the injections. Over a 29-day period, Blauer was given a series of 5 injections of classified mescaline derivatives and chemical variants. The civilian doctors administering them were not even fully aware of what the compounds were, which were designated only by military code names. So he was given these chemicals over a 1-month period. So it wasn't just the one injection of mescaline that they gave him. It was all of the injections compounded, mixed with the last final super injection that they gave him that claimed his life. So, I've been to hospitals in my life. My significant other, Lori, has been to hospitals in her life as well. We are fairly well educated in what typical doctor visits look like. Whether you're in a doctor's office or a hospital, never in my 41 years have I ever had a doctor ask me, can we use an experimental drug on you today, Mr. Smith? All right, my significant other, Lori, she's never experienced that either. Neither of us have ever had a doctor come to us and ask to experiment on us. If a doctor were to ask me something like that today, right now, I would have a lot of questions. And if they tried to coerce me, then I'd leave. I'd just get myself up and leave and go to a different hospital. These types of things deserve the knowledge of the patient. A well-educated patient is a good patient, and well-educated patients are oftentimes the more healthy patients as well. If a doctor were to ever try to offer me an experimental drug, especially if it was injection-based, all of my questions had better be answered, and I'd better be comfortable with the procedure before it happens. And that's just for one experimental injection. This guy was subject to dozens of them over a 30-day period. And the drugs that he was being administered were chemical warfare agents. That means they were drugs that could potentially be used in chemical weapons against an enemy. The next paragraph is the overdose. On January 8th, 1953, Blauer was given a 5th injection consisting of a massive 450 milligram dose of EA-1298, a variant of MDA mescaline. Notes from the experiment include Blauer actively protested the injection. So they gave him a giant super dose of the drug on this particular day. And this superdose is what killed him. And the next paragraph is his death. Within minutes of the final injection, Blauer suffered violent tremors, frothing at the mouth, and localized paralysis. He lapsed into a deep coma and was pronounced dead less than 2.5 hours later. So this final injection they gave him, which was the 5th injection of that day, I'll emphasize this was the 5th injection of mescaline that this man had been given just that day. So if let's say they were giving him 5 injections a day of this stuff over a 30-day period, that's 150 injections of mescaline over a 29-day period. They knew this man was going to die. They knew that this experiment was going to kill him. But they continued on because they were instructed to, okay, by the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. Now, 5 injections a day over 30 days of a substance they had no idea what the substance was. It was just all it had was an Army code name. It had an Army code name, EA 1298. That's all the doctors knew, is that they were giving him something called EA 1298. They had no idea it was mescaline. All right, and they injected this man with probably 150 doses of that over a 30-day period. And the doctors, whatever it was that they were giving him, the doctors had to have known that many injections over a 30-day period, 5 a day, was going to end this man's life or make him brain dead. The doctors had to know. There is no chemical under the sun that a person can endure 5 injections a day from for 30 days. There is not a human being alive that can withstand 150 injections of any chemical and survive. Period. There's just simply no way. So the next section is the government cover-up and legal battle. Falsified records. The Army immediately moved to cover up its involvement. The hospital falsely reported to the medical examiner that the drug was given for diagnostic purposes and concealed the military nature of the experiment. Blauer's ex-wife sued New York State for negligence. In 1955, the state settled for $18,000, which in today's money be about $50,000. The federal government secretly supplied half of this money on the strict condition that the United States Army roll remain entirely classified. The truth exposed is the next bullet point. In 1975, the U.S. Army finally disclosed the truth to Congress regarding its secret drug testing programs. This was the first time Blauer's family learned that his death was the result of a secret military experiment. Blauer's daughter, Elizabeth Barrett, filed an $8.5 million lawsuit against the federal government. Following a highly publicized legal battle, a federal judge awarded the estate $700,000 in 1987 for wrongful death and pretrial physical suffering, officially ruling that the government had conspired to cover up the incident. Now, so he died in 1953, and in 1987, his family was finally and duly compensated. All right. So the first lawsuit was from his wife 2 years after his death. So 2 years after his death, she was given $18,000. But then 20 years later, the U.S. Army came forward and said, okay, a lot of these injection deaths were U.S. Army activity. And one of the lawsuits was of Harold Blauer's daughter. And at this point, Harold Blauer had been dead for about 28 years. And then 12 years after this revelation that it was an Army experiment, a federal judge awarded her, Mrs. Blauer, Elizabeth Barrett, Harold Blauer's daughter, a settlement of $700,000, which in today's money would be about $3 million. It was a buyer's market back then. This was the 1980s, ladies and gentlemen. It was a buyer's market. She would have been just fine. She could have bought a really nice new house with half of this money or less than half. So she was compensated. Me personally, if I were a judge, I would have probably seen to it that she got the full $8.5 million. I think that's fair, especially because of the horrible pain and discomfort this man felt during his last minutes and his last days on this earth. I mean, he died brutally. Those chemicals had a horrible effect on him, and the effect was documented. He was convulsing. He became paralyzed. He had no control over himself. He went into a coma, and then he died of heart failure. So it was a really awful situation. It was a really awful set of circumstances that befell Mr. Blauer, who in his life was a very talented man. It was just this divorce that this man experienced. It destroyed him. It destroyed him. Divorce is hard on anybody. Divorce is hard on anybody. But it's especially hard on people that are not, they don't exactly want the divorce. The person who wants the divorce is affected and hurt by it. But the person who in the marriage who doesn't want the divorce, if it's one of those types of situations, in some divorces, both parties, the man and the woman, want the divorce. And they split the assets. Okay, that's the way it typically goes. The split is oftentimes hard on the family. It's obviously hard on the two involved. It's hard on the kids if they have any. And the future of that family is forever changed. It doesn't mean that the people involved are destroyed. Sorry, I almost dropped my recording device. Doesn't mean their life is completely destroyed or that they're over and done with, that they'll never be happy again. But it does cause psychological strain on the people involved. And then if one wants the divorce and the other doesn't, then the one that doesn't want the divorce is going to be hurt more. So it looks to me like this was a divorce where the wife wanted it and not necessarily the husband, Mr. Blauer. And he basically went into a horrible depression after his divorce from his wife, Amy. And he probably lost custody of their daughters too. And he was probably just very torn up. And he went to get himself some help at the New York Psychiatric Institute, and they said, "Hey, Mr. Blauer, thank you for coming in today. We hear you're battling some depression." Mr. Blauer said, "Yeah." And they said, "On a scale from 1 to 10, how bad is your depression?" And Mr. Blauer said, "It's a 10." And they said, "Mr. Blauer, why are you depressed?" And he said, "Well, doctor, I was recently divorced and it's having a negative impact on me." And they said, "Well, Mr. Blauer, we have just what you need." They said, we want you to check yourself into this hospital for a period of time. And we're going to get you all better, Mr. Blauer. We got some experimental chemicals we want to test on you. And we're going to test chemicals on you via injections. We're going to do it over a 30-day period, Mr. Blauer. We got some dynamic, experimental, state-of-the-art drugs here for you, Mr. Blauer. We're going to get you all better. After you take all these drugs, Mr. Blauer, we can assure you at this New York Psychiatric Hospital, you will never be sad again. So what do you say, Mr. Blauer? Mr. Blauer said, you know what? I'm not too much on board with the you guys keeping me for weeks at a time, injecting this experimental chemical in me all the while. I don't think I'm okay with that. And they said to each other, they said, all right, go get security. That's what the doctor said to his nurses. Go get security on Mr. Blauer. He's being uncooperative. And Harold Blauer said, what are you doing? And the doctor goes, we're getting security to restrain you because you're being uncooperative, Mr. Blauer. And Mr. Blauer said, what are you talking about? I just said that I'm not on board with this experiment you want to do. And the doctor said, Mr. Blauer, yes, you are on board with it. You're on board with every bit of this experiment, Mr. Blauer. And the reason you're going to be on board with it is because if you refuse me the opportunity to experiment on you with these state-of-the-art chemicals, well then, Mr. Blauer, we're going to put you in a straitjacket and dump you in a room for the rest of your life. And then security walked in the room and held Mr. Blauer down. And then they strapped him to a hospital bed. And they locked all the doors. And the doctor looked at him and said, Mr. Harold Blauer, you're going to do as you're told while you're in this hospital. This is the New York Psychiatric Institute. We're one of the most renowned psychiatric institutes anywhere in the East Coast. And you're going to listen to everything we say, and you're going to be totally cooperating. You're going to be totally cooperative with us too, Mr. Blauer. You're going to do exactly what we say, and you're going to do it when we say it. And we're going to try every bit of these chemicals on you until this experiment is done. And do you understand that? And by then, Mr. Blauer was probably already having been given his first doses of mescaline, and he probably agreed to it while he was under the influence. So over the next 30 days, they slowly killed Mr. Blauer with insulin, and then the last day they gave him a gigantic superdose of it because the Army said to, and that was the end of Mr. Blauer. And I think that the reason the U.S. Army ordered that final dose, the gigantic dose, the 450 milligram dose of the mescaline, is because the U.S. Army wanted him dead. Okay, after 30 days of injection after injection after injection of all of these compounds, right, and these derivatives of mescaline, Harold Blauer was not in a physiological state to give his consent to further testing. And the doctors in this hospital took advantage of that, his inability to say no, and they kept injecting him over and over again. And I think at some point the U.S. Army got nervous. The U.S. Army's Chemical Services Division, I think they got nervous because here they got this former tennis champion who sought psychiatric treatment to help him with depression over his divorce, and they've kept him for 30 days almost, and he's still alive. If they nurse him back to health and he leaves the hospital, what do you think he's going to say? He's going to go right to the authorities. He's going to go right to his local newspaper. He's going to go right to an attorney, and he's going to say, they just tested me over a 30-day period with multiple injections of a foreign chemical over the past 30 days, 5 times a day for the last 30 days. Okay, that was going to spell trouble for the hospital. It was going to spell trouble for the U.S. Army. It was going to spell trouble for a lot of people. If that man were to leave the hospital and then file complaints on the hospital, eventually the U.S. Army was going to come back into the fold. They were going to have to be exposed along with the hospital for what they did. So I think what the Army did was around the 30-day period, they had gotten all the data they needed, but they didn't want Harold Blauer to get better so he could leave the hospital and file complaints about what had just happened to him. So I think what the Army did was they ordered a 450 milligram dose of mescaline, which was several times the amount he had been given before in these 5-time-a-day doses of the stuff they were giving him. This was a giant dose they were about to give him. And I think the U.S. Army ordered that because they knew it would kill him. The Army knew it was a mescaline derivative. The Army knew that 450 milligrams would kill him. The doctors didn't. The doctors didn't know what they were giving him. But the Army did. And they ordered a 450 milligram dose of the stuff towards the end so that this man would perish. They didn't want him to leave better and tell on all of them. So they killed him. And the U.S. federal government had to pay the equivalent of $3 million to his daughter years later for the mishap. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to read some more about Mr. Blauer and his situation. Let's see. All right, we're going to read a statement before the Investigation Subcommittee, House Armed Services. This statement was written by Charles D. Blauer, General Counsel of the Department of the Army. That means the top lawyer in the Department of the Army. It was written September 8th, 1975, and the subjects are drug and testing, LSD for intel purposes, and the title is the use of human volunteers in experimental research by the Department of Defense. And this document is kept in the library of the Army War College. And this is basically a statement by the top the top lawyer in the U.S. Army as of September 8th, 1975. That's General Counsel. This is General Counsel. I'm sorry. I'm thinking the chief executive. This is General Counsel. So Charles D. Blauer is General Counsel. So he's basically an Army lawyer. He's a lawyer that represents the Army. When I first came across this, when I saw General Counsel, it made me think, chief executive. But this is an Army lawyer who's making this statement, not the chief executive lawyer of the U.S. Army, but it's an Army lawyer. Turning to the research on hallucinogenic drugs, we discovered 9 such contacts. The first 2 of these were negotiated in 1951 with the New York State Psychiatric Institute, a leader in the field of the use of hallucinogenics in the diagnosis and treatment of the mentally ill. The subjects were psychiatric patients. The records are ambiguous concerning the matter of the consent of the patients. The drugs utilized LSD, mescaline, and others. In the course of one of these contracts, a subject, Mr. Harold Blauer, then a patient at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, was administered a dose of mescaline derivative which proved fatal. Details of Mr. Blauer's death have been made public and are available to the committee and are appended to my statement. The Blauer death and the subject of a pending claim that a pending claim by the two daughters against the Army. A 1955 contract with Tulane University involved the administration of LSD, mescaline, and other drugs to mental patients who had theretofore had electrodes implanted in their brains as a part of their medical treatment unrelated to an Army contract. The electrodes were utilized to study the effects of drugs on the brain's functioning. The methodology used might be the same to some criticism on the ground that a range of compounds was administered to at least one patient without apparent relation to therapy or diagnosis. However, work on the brain chemistry of mental illness was still pioneering work, and in 1955, and perhaps it is not surprising in the cool light of analysis 20 years later, that some of the techniques then employed now appear less than perfect. I'm going to continue. There were the 5 remaining contracts with the University of Washington, the Research Foundation for Mental Hygiene Incorporated, the University of Maryland, and the Institute for Behavioral Research. 4 of the 5 studied LSD. The remaining ones studied many compounds, including amphetamines. They covered the time period 1953 to 1965. None of them appears remarkable, but again, I have more complete information should you desire it. Although the medical profession has had ethic codes and procedural safeguards on the use of human beings in drug experiments for over a century, I must in candor admit that they appear not to always have been followed in these tests. These standards require, for example, that the individual be informed as to all aspects of the nature, methods, and effects of the experiment, that he gave his voluntary written consent before any testing, and that he be free to withdraw from any experiment at any time. The Surgeon General will elaborate on these matters in his testimony. These are the obligations of the attending physician or the researcher conducting the experiment. Our records, admittedly incomplete, do not reflect that these procedures were necessarily followed by the research organizations with whom we contracted. To ensure compliance with these requirements, the Army has, since at least in the early 1960s, followed the practice of requiring contract clauses settling stringent controls over the use of human beings as experiments. Such a clause is present, for example, in our contract with the Institute for Behavioral Research. So that's the extent of the part of that statement that I needed for my research in this. So essentially, what this Army lawyer is saying in this document, and this is a statement before the investigation subcommittee of the House Armed Services. So this doctor is testifying before the investigation subcommittee of the House Armed Services, the House of Representative Armed Services. This is a Congressional Armed Services Committee that this attorney is testifying in front of, and he's basically telling them this. There were mistakes made in MK Ultra. Okay? There were mistakes made by the U.S. Army. There were mistakes made by the CIA. There were mistakes made by all parties involved. Okay? We authorized the testing of LSD, mescaline, and other chemicals on psychiatric patients without letting the psychiatric patients sign any kind of a waiver or any kind of a contract or any kind of an agreement. Okay? And that these experiments were very well outside of the use of legal guidelines. And what he's also saying is that these experiments were fatal. Okay, some of these experiments were fatal. And apparently there were quite a few colleges and universities that the U.S. Army had gotten with. probably in collaboration with the CIA. The CIA was in this somewhere, okay? MK Ultra was administered by the CIA and the Army, and right here, this marks the beginning of MK Ultra right here. Okay, this situation that happened with Harold Blauer, this was the beginning of MK Ultra, the beginning of it. MK Ultra began in 1953, and it continued to approximately 1972. Okay, 19 years of this program, 1953 to 72. This was the beginning of MK Ultra. What happened to Mr. Blauer? This was the beginning. Okay, this instance did not stop the CIA or the U.S. Army from continuing the experiment. Despite what happened to Mr. Blauer, these human experiments were to continue for another 19 years. We don't have a comprehensive enough list to give you, the general public, the global community, on how many people probably lost their lives in this program, because it was about administering chemicals on people, and yes, exposing people to germs as well. Okay, I've read the document to you, ladies and gentlemen, where the U.S. Army dumped whooping cough bacteria throughout Tampa, and all those thousands of people came down with whooping cough. 12 people lost their lives. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, gang stalking is right around the corner. It has similar auspices to MK Ultra. It has similar auspices to Operation Chaos. It has similar auspices to the Zersetsun. And it helps some and it harms others. The people that it harms are targeted individuals. The people that this program helps typically are called gang stalkers, because they know how to use these covert communication mechanisms that help them to get the edge on people who don't know these communication mechanisms. And sometimes these communication mechanisms are used between stalkers to point out people to commit violent crimes on. All right, to commit burglaries against, to commit vandalisms against, to slander and spread false statements about. Ladies and gentlemen, the proof is in these documents. And these documents have stood the test of time in the hearts and in the minds of the people. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us look at we're going to look at a Supreme Court matter here. And I'm going to read paragraphs 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 10, and 11. And then we're going to look at a summary of this court case, and then we're going to close the lecture. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so this is a court case that happened as part of the fallout from the Harold Blauer case. Now, this Supreme Court case was ruled on in October of 1988. So this was about 35 years after the death of Harold Blauer, but it was only about 13 years after the U.S. Army came forward and said, we're responsible for the death of Harold Blauer and many others because we tested chemical warfare agents on him and others through these contracts that we had with various hospitals around the country. So 13 years later, after a lot of this information was properly investigated and properly unpacked and properly disseminated to the public, there was a Supreme Court's case that was a part of the result of the legal fracas behind the murder of Mr. Harold Blauer. And ladies and gentlemen, I call it that because, again, I'll reiterate, the U.S. Army wanted this man dead. They didn't want this guy that they had tortured with chemicals for 30 days to get back to health. They're like, no, we're not about to stop the injections, even though we've gathered all the data we can on what their effect will be. We're going to continue the injections until this man passes away. We don't want him telling on us. So give him a super dose that'll kill him, okay? That came down from the U.S. Army Chemical Services Division. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's beneficial and necessary to know that the U.S. Army tried to cover this up, and it told the doctors at the New York Psychiatric Institute to cover up what they did. Okay, lie about the reason he died. All right, I think they said it was just some heart failure he experienced. That it was natural causes or something like that. But they covered it up, and the lengths they went to cover it up show me that they were nervous about it from the beginning. Probably 2 weeks in, they said, you know what? Some field day the media would have on us if it found out that we were using the power of the U.S. Army to test chemical warfare agents on U.S. citizens out of local psychiatric hospitals. What a field day the media would have on that. What a field day the Senate Select Committee would have on that. We don't want to get in trouble for what we're doing. We just want to investigate some things. This guy, Mr. Blauer, he looks pretty beat up mentally. We don't know if he'll ever recover. I mean, he lost his wife and his daughters. They're not coming back. He's not a tennis champion no more. He's just a depressed 43-year-old man in this psychiatric place, and he looks pretty messed up too, mentally. Maybe we could use these chemicals on him. Who's gonna care? His wife sure ain't. She left. Her and the kids have moved on. Let's test these chemicals on Mr. Harold Blauer. That's what the U.S. Army said, and they got some doctors to do it. And there was a fallout, a Supreme Court fallout, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, look, ladies and gentlemen, history is kind, okay, but history is also brutal. History can be kind. It really can. History can be very kind to people who exhibit noble qualities and traits. It can be harsh to people who do unscrupulous things. History was harsh to the U.S. Army in this instance. History was harsh because the U.S. Army's Chemical Services Division extrajudicially and clandestinely tested chemical warfare agents on unsuspecting U.S. citizens in hospitals. The doctors having not known exactly what they were giving them either. But all the doctors had was a barcode with some numbers on it. That's all the doctors had. They didn't know what it was they were giving them. And the Army hid from the doctors what was being given to these patients. They probably lied to the doctors and said it was harmless. These are harmless vaccines, they're harmless antibiotics, they're harmless this, they're harmless that. We're just doing experiments on the physiology of people. Right? And the doctors probably just said, okay, fine with us. We don't know what we're giving these people, but the U.S. Army says it's okay, so it's okay. And they were injecting people with chemical warfare agents without their knowledge. All right, this shows the capacity, ladies and gentlemen, that governments are capable, with all their vast resources, of experimenting on people. Okay, and have in the past, in this very country, as recent as 1973, used its army for those purposes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not saying that 52 years later it's totally possible or impossible for any of our governmental auxiliaries to still practice this stuff. If you ask me, I believe that they are, because there's more data to be collected. There's more human behavior experiments and research to be had. There's much more to learn about human behavior than ever. And now that we're in the digital age, there's a whole new arena of human behavior to discover. And that's digital human behavior and how it has shaped human behavior in today's world. There's a lot to discover. There's a lot to discover. Now, my harassment campaign, ladies and gentlemen, is not just about human experimentation. Mine is also about decomposition and corrosion, kind of like the Zersetson. You see, mine is not just simply an experiment. I don't just have U.S. Army and various other governmental components like the CIA watching me or orchestrating staged events in my life for research purposes. Some of this is actually aimed at degrading the standard of the general quality of my life or my standard of living. It's aimed at degrading that. It's aimed at corroding that. It's aimed at decomposition, just like the Zersetson. It's aimed at decomposition. I'm not just being observed. I'm being actively tampered with in so many different capacities that you wouldn't believe, ladies and gentlemen. So some parts of this program are aimed just at study and watching a target, and other parts of this program are actually about intervening in the target's life in a negative, hostile, violent way. So I've got both. Okay, I got both. I got watchers that are just observing, and I got people that intervene in a very knuckle-headed, thuggish, and animalistic capacity. And you know, I call gang stalkers useful idiots for a reason, ladies and gentlemen. So here's what I want to do, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to light up some more tobacco, and we are going to start So we're going to read some of this complaint that the state of New York filed against the United States of America over the Harold Blauer situation. This is case number 88-745 in the Supreme Court of the United States, October term 1988, on a petition for a writ of certiorari to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. It's a brief for the United States in opposition, and there's a table of contents here, questions presented, opinions below jurisdiction, statement, argument, and conclusion. So, okay, so we're going to read these. See, I said 1, 2, 3, 10, and 11. And then we're going to read an AI-generated summary of the key points of this document. The opinions below is the opinion of the Court of Appeals is reported at 853 F2D 124. These are code names for statutes and documents. The opinion of the district court is reported at 668F, supplement 339. The district court's earlier order denying the state's New York motion to dismiss is unreported. The jurisdiction is the judgment of the Court of Appeals was entered on August 2nd, 1988. The petition for a writ of certiorari was filed on October 31st, Halloween Day, 1988. The jurisdiction of this court is invoked under 28 U.S.C. 1254-1. That is the federal statute. And the question presented is whether the 11th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution bars the United States in a federal court action against the Federal Tort Claims Act from seeking contribution against the state of New York. So the statement begins. We're going to read paragraphs 1, 2, 3, 10, and 11. And then a summary. Harold Blauer died in 1953 from drug injections given as part of a testing program administered by the New York State Psychiatric Institute. The program itself was part of a secret chemical warfare experiment conducted at the behest of the U.S. Army. Blauer's widow sued the petitioner, the state of New York, for her husband's wrongful death. In 1955, the parties agreed to an $18,000 settlement, which the New York Court of Claims ratified. As part of the settlement, Blauer's estate executed a release in favor of the petitioner, NYSPI doctors, and the supplier of the drug that had caused Blauer's death. The U.S. was not a party to that action, but it had agreed with the petitioner to pay half of the settlement. Blauer's estate was not aware of that arrangement. All right, so we're gonna do this line by line. So it talks about the death of Harold Blauer, and it talks about the settlement of $18,000 that was made to Blauer's widow. Now, I have not found any data online as to whether or not Harold Blauer had remarried since his divorce. I doubt that he had, because he went to the psychiatric clinic on his own, and over that 30-day period, no contact was had with any of Blauer's family. So I doubt he had remarried by the time he'd gone into that institute. But this might confuse some of you listeners, because you're aware that the cause of his depression in the first place was his divorce from his wife. So it says here his widow. Now, technically, if they had already divorced, she is not a widow to him. Okay, a widow is a woman whose husband passes away before she does. She is a widowed person. Her spouse has passed away. If you're a man and your wife passes away before you do, you're called a widower. It means your wife passed away before you. Okay? And in order for this woman to be his widow, they would have had to have still been married at the time of his death. But it's well documented that the cause of his depression was a divorce. So what that might imply, and mind you, court reporters make mistakes too. But technically that may mean that they were in the process of a divorce but had not gotten a divorce yet. But there's also the possibility that this document here, the court reporter made a mistake, and rather than putting his ex-wife, put widower. All right, and here's why I say that might be a mistake on the part of the court reporter. Is because if anyone claiming to be this man's wife was able to get an $18,000 settlement, that means she would have had to have been legally and lawfully married to him at the time of his death. I don't think that's the case, okay? This was a man who had just experienced a divorce, okay? And he pretty much had no one in the way of family to check on him during his time in the ER. Or the psychiatric clinic. So this statement here where it says an ex-wife got 18 or a widow got $18,000. Okay, it's possible that it's talking about his ex-wife and it put widow mistakenly. Because they were already done with this. They were already done with their marriage. They weren't married anymore. So what I think happened was, okay, so their kids were minors at this time. Their kids were in their early teens. So with Harold Blauer's passing, now he can't pay child support to his ex-wife for their kids. So if his ex-wife sued the state of New York and got $18,000, that was to cover basic costs that were the result of the loss of income that his death caused the ex-wife and daughters. So I think this is a typo here where it says his widow, because he was already divorced from her when he passed away. This is basically a bunch of legal red tape as to a release that Blauer's estate executed in favor of the doctors and the supplier of the drug that caused Blauer's death. But in 1955, the family didn't know it was an experiment. They didn't learn that till 20 years later, you see. So at the time of this settlement that was made, 2 years after the death of Harold Blauer, this $18,000 settlement, his family did not know that this was a federal mess-up that involved the U.S. Army and the administration of drugs in an experimental capacity. So the family signed a waiver absolving the New York Psychiatric Institute and the supplier of the chemical that was used on Mr. Blauer of any wrongdoing. They basically sued for medical malpractice. They didn't realize that it was much more sinister than that. Okay? So the next paragraph reads, in August 1975, the Secretary of the Army disclosed the Army's role in Blauer's death. Elizabeth Barrett, Blauer's daughter, and the administratrix of Blauer's estate then filed 3 actions under the Federal Tort Claims Act in the U.S. District Court. Now this paragraph picks up 20 years later. And it continues against the U.S. Okay, there's a Federal Tort Claims Act lawsuit brought against the U.S. and a number of individuals for their negligence in causing this woman's father's death. Now it's the daughter suing. His ex-wife or his supposed ex-wife, okay, his soon-to-be ex-wife, got $18,000 for Harold Blauer's death, which is unfortunate because their marriage was already at the point of dissolution. However, the wife got $18,000. It helped her with expenses. Okay, that's positive. Okay, he was her breadwinner. She got this money for expenses for the children and herself. That's positive. Okay, but this was not a person that Harold Blauer was going to be spending much more time with at all. So the wife sued and got $18,000 in 1955. 20 years later, the daughter sued. Okay, she's 35 now, but at the time at the time of her father's death, she was 15. Okay, 20 years later, now the daughter is suing. But unlike her mother, who sued the state of New York, the daughter is suing the U.S. federal government because of the revelation that it was a federal entity that injected their father with multiple doses of a chemical warfare agent, causing his demise. All right, so we'll continue. Paragraph 2. In May 1986, the U.S. Under Rule 28 U.S.C. 1345 and Fed Rule CIV P14/3 moved to file a third-party complaint against the petitioner. On the June 27th of 1986, the district court granted the motion and severed that action from the underlying FICA lawsuit, or FTCA lawsuit. The petitioner then moved to dismiss the third-party complaint, contending, among other things, that the 11th Amendment barred that action. The district court deferred consideration of the matter pending the outcome of the FTCA lawsuit. After entering a judgment in that case against the United States, the district court denied the petitioner's motion to dismiss the third-party complaint, insofar as it thought the contribution from petitioner as a joint tort feasor. The district court rejected the petitioner's contention that the FTCA requires that the U.S. be treated as if it were a private party for the purpose of applying the 11th Amendment. So in that particular paragraph, we see where the United States moved to file a third-party complaint against the petitioner, which is the state of New York. And the reason that it's filing this complaint is because the attorneys that are representing the United States in this matter believe that the 11th Amendment to the United States Constitution prevents New York from filing the complaint against the U.S. that it wants to file. So in other words, here we have a situation, ladies and gentlemen, where this matter concerning Harold Blauer has hit the fan. Okay, and here's what's happened. So it came to light that Harold Blauer's experiment was an Army experiment. That's come to light. So the state of New York, particularly its attorney, its state attorney, okay, the top attorney in New York, is basically of the mindset that the United States of America, its federal government, was responsible for Harold Blauer's death and not the state of New York. See, the state of New York had already been sued by the wife or soon-to-be ex-wife of Harold Blauer back in 1955, 20 years prior. Okay, or 30 years prior now. So it's a situation where the state of New York is trying to wash its hands of Harold Blauer's death by filing a complaint against the United States of America in federal court. I mean, this is a Supreme Court case too. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the land. This case reached the Supreme Court because New York was like, well, okay, now that we know that it was a federal program that caused Harold Blauer's death, we're not going to allow documents to show that it was the state of New York's fault that this man died. Yeah, it was a state-run psychiatric clinic that used state resources, and it was run by the state. But we were sued already by Harold Blauer's ex-wife or soon-to-be ex-wife and had to pay her $18,000 over this, as if we were the responsible party for Harold Blauer's death. The state of New York is basically saying to the Supreme Court, no, we're going to file a complaint against the United States of America for allowing that program to be implemented in the first place, because it was a federal program that used our doctors to inject this man with a chemical that was fatal. So the state of New York is saying, we're washing our hands of this. We're about to blame the federal government. And they filed a complaint against the U.S. federal government via the Supreme Court. And the U.S. has turned around and said, well, the state of New York's complaint against us is not valid because the 11th Amendment prevents the state of New York from filing the kind of complaint they're looking to file against the United States federal government. All right, a district court denied the petitioner's motion. Now, here's the thing, too, ladies and gentlemen. It just goes to show that no one wants to take the blame for this. So paragraph 3 reads, the Court of Appeals affirmed it recognized that the 11th Amendment does not prohibit the United States from suing a state and federal court. And following the United States v. Hawaii, that case held that the U.S. could bring a third-party claim for contribution against a state in an FTCA action naming the U.S. as a defendant. Here, New York provided a right of action against the state as a joint tortfeasor, but had attempted to limit such actions to state courts. The Court of Appeals concluded that where New York has consented to liability for contribution, thus providing the U.S. with a valid claim under state law, neither the 11th Amendment or any state law bars federal jurisdiction with respect to such a claim by the United States. The court reasoned that the state's effort to defeat the federal court jurisdiction failed because the Constitution vests jurisdiction of suits involving the United States in the federal courts, and Congress has expressly provided for federal district court jurisdiction of such suits brought by the U.S. The Court of Appeals further held that the FTCA itself does not call for a different result. The FTCA defines the standard of liability where the U.S. is a defendant. The statute does not affect the federal government's rights as a plaintiff. As a Court of Appeals observed, the U.S., although agreeing in the FTCA to be treated as a private individual defendant under state law, had not consented to be treated as a private individual in all respects. For example, the FTCA expressly bars recovery of punitive damages and prejudgment interest against the United States, and the statute vests exclusive jurisdiction of tort claims against the United States and the federal courts. In light of such exceptions to the private individual status of the United States under the FTCA, the Court of Appeals declined to read the FTCA as a limiting or abrogating either the power of the U.S. that is implicit in our federal system to maintain or the jurisdiction of the federal courts that is vested by Article 3 of the Federal Constitution to hear and decide an action against a state in federal court. So basically, what it's saying here is that it's to summarize this, it's basically saying that the U.S. Court of Appeals, okay, who looked at this case, ruled, or I'm sorry, the U.S. Court of Appeals looked at this case, and it is basically saying this: that if there's any lawsuit that involves the United States and one of the states, because mind you, the federal government can sue a state, and a state can also sue the federal government. Now, it's like this. If a state sues the federal government, or if the federal government sues a state, and typically if a state sues the federal government or the federal government sues a state, it's over a matter of constitutionality. Okay, it has to be that high. It has to involve the workings of the United States Constitution. It has to be a constitutional issue for a state to sue the government, or for the government, or for the federal government to sue a state. Okay, it has to be a constitutional matter. And what this paragraph is saying is that those matters are always to be handled in federal courts. The jurisdiction of such a matter is handled at the federal level. Okay, let's say North Dakota sues the United States, or the United States sues North Dakota. That matter cannot be decided in state courts. Okay, if it involves a lawsuit and the U.S. federal government, that matter must be handled in federal courts. Okay, is the ruling here. So that this matter was properly decided in federal courts and not state courts, is what that is saying. And that's important in this case too, because the state of New York was already sued and already lost $18,000 in the negligent demise of Harold Blauer. Now, mind you, $18,000 in 1955 was about $50,000 in today's, well, probably more than that, probably closer to $70,000 in today's money. Yeah, 70. Then again, yeah, I'd say $70,000 is reasonable. So that's about what she was paid for the death of Mr. Blauer, his soon-to-be ex-wife, obviously. But mind you, there's conflicting information online about the relationship he had with his wife. But ultimately, she got a settlement of $18,000, and the state of New York is basically it's a petitioner versus the U.S. It wants a writ of certiorari. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to read paragraphs 9, 10, and 11. The petitioner aims to analogize this case to the U.S. versus Illinois, which allowed the U.S. to make a third-party claim for indemnification against the state of Illinois. Even through a state law authorized or no such claim. The analogy is inapt because the Court of Appeals have looked to state law as the source of a government's claim for contribution. And I'm going to stop right there. These need to be handled federally. You see, so there's already a mistake. Okay, you need federal precedents to settle federal cases. Okay, so that jurisdictional situation is being looked at again. We're going to move to part 10, paragraph 10. We have found only one reported decision holding that the U.S. could not file a third-party claim against a state because the claim was not an action commenced by the U.S. within the meaning of 28 U.S.C. 1345, Parks versus the United States. No other court has followed that holding. You got the U.S. versus Hawaii, U.S. versus Illinois, U.S., and there's all these cases being cited. And you got Williams versus the United States, a few others, U.S. versus Illinois. Indeed, the court that decided Park no longer adheres to that case's ill-fated interpretation of Section 1345. Androlonis versus the U.S., that's another case that's cited. Part 11 reads, decisions like Smith versus Reeves are not to the contrary. Those decisions simply permit a state to limit private actions against it to its own courts, and at the same time to retain its 11th Amendment immunity, an immunity that has no application in a suit against a state by the United States. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is we are going to look at a AI generated summary of the meat of what we've read here. And if you'll just give me one quick second, I'm going to pull that up. Give me 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. The document that I am looking for has eluded me. Just give me 1 second. I gotta track it down. It's basically as I was analyzing this court case, there was there were a number of issues present that I needed some clarification on, so I consulted an AI module, and I think I found it. I usually have these things available with me at the time I start, but I must have mistakenly left these documents out of the main part of the lecture. So I'm going to add them to the main part of the lecture really quickly, and we will continue. This is being very stubborn. Just give me 1 second, please. All right, we are going to begin this summary. So it's the state of New York versus the United States of America. So thank you for your patience. I had to go back and locate some documents that I thought I had with me presently. So this is a meta AI summary. Wait a minute, it might be Google Gemini. I think it's Gemini. But it says that it's the brief for the U.S. in opposition in the state of New York versus the United States. Now, this case was about whether the 11th Amendment bars the U.S. from suing the state of New York in federal court for contribution under the Federal Tort Claims Act. All right, and it talks about the Harold Blauer situation. In 1975, the Army disclosed its role. Blauer's daughter sued the U.S. and won $702,000. The U.S. then filed a third-party complaint against New York in federal court for contribution as a joint tortfeasor. The New York claimed that the 11th Amendment barred it. So, the lower courts rejected New York's 11th Amendment claim, and the Second Circuit affirmed its claim and said that the 11th Amendment doesn't stop the U.S. from suing a state in federal court. The U.S. argument in this brief was that the 11th Amendment doesn't apply to suits by the U.S. versus a state. The FTCA doesn't convert the U.S. into a private party for all purposes. Cases like Horton and Hill don't help in New York because those states hadn't waived immunity for contribution, and New York can't use state laws to defeat federal jurisdiction. So, the outcome was the Supreme Court denied certiorari, so that the Second Circuit ruling stood. The U.S. could pursue contribution from New York in federal court. And this case is cited for two principles. The U.S. retains its sovereign ability to sue states in federal court, and a state's waiver of immunity and creation of a cause of action means it can't use the 11th Amendment to block the U.S. from federal court. So, as you can see, the U.S. and New York, they're suing each other. They're filing complaints against each other. And the United States is basically saying back to New York, hey, look, you were a joint tortfeasor in that death. Okay, the state of New York is partially liable for that death. It isn't just the U.S. Yes, the Army. It was an Army experiment, but the state of New York had doctors that complied with it. So yeah, the U.S. just got sued for $700,000 by this man's daughter, and we paid it. But we want it to go on paper that the state of New York is equally liable as we are in the Harold Blauer fatality. Okay, so the New York and the United States are basically wiping dirt off on each other with this. Neither wants to take full blame for it. And yes, the matter has already been settled in court to the tune of $700,000 for Elizabeth Barrett. But in the aftermath of this, neither the U.S. or New York is going to take all the blame. Okay? New York wanted a writ of certiorari against the U.S. It was denied. And the U.S. was able to continue its legal action against New York to essentially get them designated as a not really a co-defendant, but as an entity that had equal responsibility for the Harold Blauer situation. Neither the state of New York or the U.S. is going to take full blame for this. And there were jurisdictional matters that needed to be considered. I mean, this was a really awful situation, and the lawsuit was under the Federal Tort Claims Act, and it's an act that allows private parties to sue the federal government for personal injury, property damage, or death caused by negligent or wrongful actions of federal employees acting within the scope of their employment. So that was the basis of Elizabeth Barrett's lawsuit. It was the Federal Tort Claims Act. She believed that her father passed away because of negligence on the part of federal employees acting within the scope of their employment. And she was right, it was the U.S. Army. So she was able to sue under the Federal Tort Claims Act. It was an embarrassing moment for the U.S. Army, which is unfortunate because the U.S. Army over the years has had some really good moments and has accomplished many great things, both foreign and domestically, in times of war and in times of peace. The U.S. Army is the pride of the American people. It's the pride of this government. The armed services, not just the U.S. Army. There are a lot of auxiliaries in the Department of War. All right, you got the Army, you got the Navy, you got the Air Force, you got various reconnaissance offices. There are a lot of auxiliaries in the U.S. Department of War, and it's got a lot to be proud of with respect to the talent that it has been able to recruit and retain over the decades. And the U.S. Army and all of the various components of the United States Department of Defense, as it was formerly known, has a lot to be proud of. It's done a lot of really great things, typically, that are remarkable. But this is where it gets disturbing, that this same great military auxiliary called the Department of Defense or the Department of War had in the past participated in these horrible acts. When you look at gang stalking being so very close in scope and in operation to MKUltra, it makes you think, are they back at it again? This same U.S. Army who the average person has respect and admiration for. Most U.S. citizens have respect and admiration, I believe, for our armed services because of what they train to do and because of what they're ready to do. But keep in mind, every armed services around the world are trained and ready to defend the homeland at all costs. That's why they're admired by people, and that's why they get paid good money out of the taxpayers' checks to pay the U.S. Armed Services personnel. The taxpayer pays good money for their salary, and so that they can have a good lifestyle. And in return, I think the American people deserve better than forced mescaline injections. All right, and any experiment that the U.S. Army or the CIA or any government auxiliary is running now, all I can say is that I hope they're being responsible about it. Because there's a lot about gang stalking that to me is terroristic. I mean, how many people have to get run over by synchronized vehicles driven by stalkers before this can be called domestic terrorism? And all persons ought to be held responsible as if they were domestic terrorists. It's the spreading of germs too, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get into that too. All right? Just because this stuff happened decades ago doesn't mean it isn't capable or possible that it could happen again. I believe it is happening again right now in this world that we live in through gang stalking. These same auspices and mechanisms. And as much respect as I have for military personnel, regardless of the branch or department that you work in, to be ready to defend the homeland at the drop of a hat, that's an admirable thing. But keep something in mind, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to a political dissident. And no, I'm not a political dissident because I'm schizophrenic because I came forward about gang stalking. No, the opposite. I'm a political dissident because I am a patriot and I do care about the United States, even if I have to leave one day and move to another country. Okay? It's a tough situation to be in when you're being targeted by members of a government auxiliary, be it federal, state, or local, that you have a lot of respect for. All right, I've had similar episodes with local law enforcers who I also have respect for, trying to get me incarcerated or harmed or worse over some flimsy edict that was apparently entered against me by the Miami-Dade Public Library system that I wasn't even notified about. And that's a whole big giant mess in its own right there, ladies and gentlemen. But if you admire the police, it's a really bad feeling to be targeted by them, which in my case was possibly due to miscommunication. Possibly it was miscommunication, or in the case of the library, no communication. Okay, it's possible that some lies were told about me by the library staff and by officers on the force of Miami-Dade Sheriff who don't like the stuff I write about. But ultimately, I got targeted pretty bad, and so did my significant other. And think it's unfortunate because I've always had a lot of respect for Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office, always. So for me to run into the types of things I've run into with some of the officers on their force, it's not a good feeling. The same is the truth with the U.S. Army. I mean, the U.S. Army obviously has a hand in gang stalking. Why do I know this? Because the U.S. Army's always had a role in covert operations here in the United States, to a higher degree than the Navy and the Air Force. Okay, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force have all had a role in various projects that the U.S. federal government has run. I think the U.S. Army was the major participant in MK Ultra, and then I think the Navy participated in a number of the sub-projects. And then I think the Air Force was involved in Operation Chaos, which was a program that ran at the same time as MK Ultra, but it was not under the MK Ultra banner. It was its own separate project. It had quite a bit of espionage and disruption going on, and that involved the U.S. Air Force. So over the past 6 decades, we've seen all 3 of the major U.S. Armed Forces divisions participating in human experiments. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, they've all done it at some point over the past 60 years. My thinking is this: has it really stopped? Has it really stopped? Remember, ladies and gentlemen, President Richard Nixon said during president that he renounced and was totally disgusted by the use of U.S. citizens as experiments by government auxiliaries. Okay, this was in the mid-70s. And he ordered it stopped, but the CIA never stopped. So what I'm saying is this: is the CIA powerful enough? Is the Department of Defense powerful enough to continue doing these kinds of experiments outside of the scope of what the President of the United States or the U.S. Congress or even the Supreme Court of the United States thinks is necessary or constitutional? The answer is yes. Okay, the Departments of Defense or Justice, their covert operations divisions, they can do whatever they want to do outside of the scope of what the President, the Supreme Court, or Congress recommends. Okay, they're that powerful. They still can pull programs like MK Ultra out of a hat right now, right here, today. Operation Chaos, an American version of the Zersetzung, which is called gang stalking. All of these things are very easily recreated. Easily recreated. And it's a shame because they're not democratic. It's an undemocratic thing. The Zersetzung was an undemocratic thing. It was basically a government using its secret police, the Stasi, and hundreds of thousands of plainclothes civilian spies to march around East Germany day and night looking for political dissidents or other people that were particularly that may have been injurious to the state, and essentially marking them as enemies of the state and using their secret police and their plainclothes civilian spies to totally destroy the quality of those persons' lives and the lives of their family. There were some Zersetzung victims whose daughters and sons wound up in Zersetzung programs and had their lives destroyed too, just because you were the son or daughter of a political dissident. So the political dissident's life was destroyed by the Zersetzung, and his children's lives were destroyed as well. You see, it's the decomposition of the person's life. They weren't arresting political dissidents or people who showed or who rather communicated differences that they had with the East German government. They didn't arrest them all. They didn't kill them all. They didn't throw them into gulags like Joseph Stalin did. They just simply used their resources and the human capital that they had in the civilian spies to simply erode and destroy the quality and the content, the very substance of these persons' lives. And it's a shame that such a program has been reborn in the clandestine gang stalking. And just keep something in mind, ladies and gentlemen. I saw heightened levels of gang stalking while I was attending college. While I was attending the universities of Wright State and University of Dayton, I experienced quite a bit of synchronization on those college campuses. And a lot of it followed me right into the classroom, and I had to deal with quite a bit of pestering and hostile behavior from students in my classrooms, and it was because I was marked from somewhere as a target. And those students, even though many of them were anywhere from 12 to 15 years younger than me, we'll say anywhere from 9 to 12 years younger than me at that point in time, were using gang stalking tactics against me, who at the time was a 30-year-old man, you you see. And eventually, those situations became fairly difficult to manage, and that coupled with a car accident that I experienced at some point during my senior year at University of Dayton, I had to withdraw medically. So, ladies and gentlemen, it follows you everywhere. And when you look at programs like this and you see it was clearly the U.S. Army and the CIA working together, it makes you think, what is today's Army and CIA capable of? Do they still have covert operations in place that resemble MK or the Zersetzung? Are there still protocols and mechanisms that are being implemented without the knowledge of the Supreme Court, Congress, and the President that are meant to sort of control society's progression through time, to control U.S. citizens' lives perpetually, either good or for bad? I mean, what else do we have going on in the United States? Because I think MK Ultra, Operation, and programs like Operation Chaos and programs like the Zersetzung, I think they only scratch the surface. I think right now in the United States we have a combination of all three. And people are different nowadays than they were back in the 1950s. It's hard to know what kind of mechanisms were in play in the 1950s that made programs like the Zersetzung work in East Germany and MK Ultra work in the United States. What qualities do present Americans have that Americans in the 1950s didn't have that might make today's gang stalker more dangerous than the gang stalkers of the 1950s? Okay? I think personally, technology and people's personal dispositions. Okay, I think that more Americans in today's world have more polluted worldviews. I think the people in the 1950s, the stalkers that operated back then, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I think that they were very stiff, very rigid, and very ignorant people. But today's gang stalker is a little different. Today's gang stalker is buffoonish, idiotic, and problematic. Okay, that's the difference that I see between the stalkers of today's world and the stalkers of decades past. And apparently the stalkers of today's world have sort of this gelatin-like jellyfish quality going, where nothing could bring an American stalker more pleasure than causing as much damage to another person in as anonymous a way as in as anonymous a way possible, and in the safest way possible, with very little in the way of retribution or consequence for your actions. Okay, and some gang stalkers like to operate totally behind the scenes. They don't even want the target individual to know that they're behind it. You see, because the targeted individual's enemies, regardless of how long ago they were your enemy, they can tap into your gang stalking campaign and become a part of the degradation. You see, I got people I haven't seen in 25 years, okay? People I haven't seen since my junior year of high school that I saw driving up and down the street in Kendall, Florida, not long after I had completed a civilian patrol assignment out there. Okay, I saw these guys driving up and down the street, guys I used to play athletic events with and at the varsity level in high school. These guys were driving up and down the street in Kendall, Florida, out and about while I was out and about. Okay, that's synchronization, that's espionage, that's a lot of things. And these guys did not acknowledge me. They didn't say anything to me or anything. They might not even known it was me that they were looking at, but I remembered them. And I think I was the person they were looking for. Otherwise, I mean, who randomly goes to Kendall if you live in Ohio or somewhere in the Midwest? Who randomly travels to Kendall, Florida, and just happens to drive up and down the street as one of your former teammates? Okay, as I'm out and about, and I cross paths with them. Few of them wore disguises. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, this program is the Zersetson. Okay, it is MK Ultra. It is Operation Chaos. It is COINTELPRO. It is Reconstruction era domestic terrorism. It's all of these things combined into a single deleterious unit. Okay, and mind you, ladies and gentlemen, I am not one to get on any broadcast and say that I want something bad to happen to America, or I'm anti-American, or I'm a person that wants to see anything bad befall the American people. I'm not one to get on any broadcast and say that, because it's quite frankly, it's not my intention to do so. Okay? I'm a researcher, I'm an analyst, I'm a broadcaster, I'm an editor-in-chief, I'm an author, and I'm the chief executive officer of my own enterprises that talk about a very important political issue that I, your host, have been faced with for 30 years. 31 years now. Okay? This is my story. Okay? This is my narrative. This is my effort to communicate these things to a global audience in a way that is factual. Ladies and gentlemen, the facts are not always friendly things. And in this case, I'm not anti-American. Okay, I don't wish harm on anybody. But at the same time, I don't want anybody to be able to perpetrate acts of harm against me as I go through my life the same way that anyone born into this world goes through their life. And I have the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, just like anybody has a right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And quite frankly, I've said this before, I don't mind being monitored, I don't mind being watched, I don't mind being surveilled, but I'd like that it be done professionally, and I don't think that as a U.S. citizen, I lack the right to request that any surveillance done on me be done in a respectful, professional fashion. I mean, if you're sending undercover operatives around me, let them be professional, let them act professional. Send them a signal on the ground to be professional, or maybe if they're wearing earpieces, whisper in that earpiece to be professional around Smith. I don't think that's too much to ask. I'm not telling you to get lost. Okay, if you have a legit reason for being here, so be it. Be professional about it. That's all I ask. As to any undercover operative, just be professional. And I'll be as nice as I can to your undercovers, but you have to understand. And this is to whoever's sending them. If these are Army undercovers, or maybe if they're undercovers from a federal, state, or local agency, or if they're private undercovers, whatever kind of undercovers these are, okay? Listen, these guys, I think their proximity to me is a problem, because these guys get around me and fling germs in the air intentionally. It's obviously intentional. With all kinds of different bodily functions that a person has. Okay, imagine all the things a sick person does in the bed, right? Imagine a bunch of grown undercover men coming around you like that all the time, off of signals, and sit right next to you and do everything they can to spread germs to you. It reminds me of some things I saw the U.S. Army do in the 1960s and 70s. It reminds me of those things. It reminds me of the time the U.S. Army went into airports in many major cities across the Midwest and the North Coast, walking up to people with suitcases that had aerosol cans full of bacteria in them and spraying down the American people covertly and clandestinely in these airports with bacteria. Men, women, and children getting sprayed down with bacteria by the Army. It reminds me of these things, and it makes me want to talk about these things because we've seen these things before. We've seen gang stalking before. We've seen the Zersetsa. We've seen MK Ultra. We've seen Operation Chaos. We've seen COINTELPRO. We've seen the lengths that our federal government went to cover up the Agent Orange catastrophe in Vietnam. We've seen the government mess up, okay? Now, of course, the government ain't perfect. No government is perfect. But if we're talking about the land of liberty here, we're talking about the freest country on earth as it has built itself, the shining city on the hill, the constitutional republic, all right, the equal justice before the law country. We're seeing clandestine acts of pure thuggery and hostility being perpetrated against the American people behind closed doors. And these are matters that need to be brought to the attention of the American people because, quite frankly, it's deleterious government activity. And if it involves the U.S. Army, which I don't see how it couldn't. All of these undercover human experimentation projects were run by the CIA and the U.S. Army. So, I mean, this gang stalking thing has to have CIA and U.S. Army elements. Now, keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, as I said at the beginning of the lecture, not every person that is employed by the CIA or the U.S. Army has access to covert operations like gang stalking. But it follows the same formula as all the other programs that I've mentioned tonight. They get together, they implement these programs under the banner of human experimentation, and they find a big chunk of the U.S. population to act as civilian actors. It's the same setup as the Zersetsa, but it's being perpetrated here in the U.S. as opposed to in Germany. So, we're going to get into the final part of this lecture. All right, we are going to look at some instances of germ terror. All right, so this is going to be a CBS News article. It was published in 2002, October 8th. And it is an AP article that is posted on CBS News. And it reads, the United States secretly tested chemical and biological weapons on American soil during the 1960s. Newly declassified Pentagon reports show. The test included releasing deadly nerve agents in Alaska and spraying bacteria over Hawaii, according to the documents obtained Tuesday. The U.S. has also tested nerve agents in Canada and Britain in conjunction with those two countries, and biological and chemical weapons in at least two other states, Maryland and Florida. The summaries of more than 24 tests show that biological and chemical tests were much more widespread than the military has acknowledged previously. The Pentagon released records earlier this year that chemical and biological agents had been sprayed on ships at sea. The military reimbursed ranchers and agreed to stop open-air nerve agent testing at its main chemical weapons center in the Utah desert after about 6,400 sheep died when nerve gas drifted away from the test range. But the Pentagon never before has provided details of the Alaskan, Hawaiian, Canadian, and British tests. The Department of the Defense Department planned to formally release summaries of 28 biological and chemical weapons tests at a House Veterans Affairs subcommittee hearing Wednesday. The documents did not say whether any civilians had been exposed to the poisons. Military personnel exposed to weapons agents would have worn protective gear, although the masks and suits used at the time were far less sophisticated than those in use today. So I'll stop there before I continue. The Pentagon released documents that the United States used deadly nerve gases in Alaska and in Utah, and it sprayed bacteria over the state of Hawaii. Okay, in chemical and biological weapons tests on the American people. It says that it tested nerve agents in Canada and Britain in conjunction with those two countries. But, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about that. I'm going to have to see the documents. I mean, the Congress of the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States, and the President of the United States did not know that the U.S. Army was testing bacterial weapons on people. They didn't know. This was a covert operation. So when it says here that Canada and Britain did similar tests, you know what? I don't know about that, because how can you say that Canada and Britain allowed the United States to come there and test bacteria on their populations too, when the U.S. Congress wasn't even fully briefed on these tests? I mean, the proper channels in the U.S. government didn't know about these tests. So how can you say that the governments of Canada and Britain knew about these tests when the federal government of the United States didn't even know holistically? There may have been a senator or two that had word of it, but ultimately this situation was classified. For 42 years it was classified. So Congress probably found out in 2002 when the American people found out. Okay? Operations like this, where you're spreading bacteria over people using the power of the state, these types of operations are kept confidential a lot of times. So I'm curious as to how much the British government even knew that the United States was doing this. It's possible that the United States, its army got in contact with certain persons in Britain's intelligence community and said, hey, let's do this experiment. You don't even have to tell your prime minister. You don't even have to tell the British Parliament. You don't even have to tell the monarchs of England that we're doing this. And I don't think that the U.S. told Britain or Canada, their governments, what was going to happen. I think it was a silent co-op that certain complacent members of the intelligence communities of Canada and Britain jumped in on. Okay? I don't believe for 1 second that the Queen of England or its Parliament or its Prime Minister or the people of Britain would consent to the United States coming here and spraying bacteria over the British population to see what the effect would be. I don't think any ruling political party of a British government would be on board with that. So it makes me think that the U.S. carried this operation out in secret in Britain and Canada, the same way it covered it out and it did this program in secret here. Okay? And mind you, the U.S. Congress wouldn't have been on board with it. Neither would the Senate. Neither would the entire House if they held a vote. Neither would the Supreme Court, and neither would the office of the president. No one in the U.S. federal government would be okay with this. Okay, this was obviously a co-op between the U.S. Army, its Secret Operations Division, and probably the Secret Operations Divisions of a number of other people in Canada and Britain. I think that this was a top secret operation that was hidden from the American people. It was hidden from the bulk of the American government. It was hidden from the British people. It was hidden from the bulk of the British government. And it was hidden from the people of Canada and the bulk of the Canadian governments. All right, I have no reason to believe that this was a scrupulous operation. All right, and also it's saying that there were more than 24 tests, and that these biological and chemical tests were much more widespread than the military has previously acknowledged. There was a test done in Utah, in the Utah desert, which killed 6,400 sheep, so some farmer got to do an insurance claim behind that, and possibly sued. But that information is not here. But the Pentagon never before has provided details of the Alaskan, Hawaiian, Canadian, and British tests. The Defense Department planned to formally release summaries of 28 biological and chemical weapons tests at a House Veteran Affairs Subcommittee hearing Wednesday. The documents did not say whether any civilians had been exposed to the poisons. Military personnel exposed to weapons agents would have worn protective gear. The Pentagon says although the gas masks and suits at the time were far less sophisticated than those in use today. The head of the House Veterans Affairs panel called for further investigation of the tests. Our focus must be on quickly identifying those veterans who were involved, assessing where they suffered any negative health consequences, and if warranted, providing them with adequate health care and compensation for their service, said Representative Chris Smith, a New Jersey Republican. The tests were part of Project 112, a military program in the 1960s and 70s to test chemical and biological weapons and defenses against them. Parts of the testing program done on Navy ships were I'm sorry, 1 second, please. All right, well, that part of the page kind of got cut off. Some of those involved in the test saying that they now suffer health problems linked to their exposure to dangerous chemicals and germs. They are pressing the Veterans Affairs Department to compensate them. Earlier this year, the Defense Department acknowledged for the first time that some of the 1960s tests used real chemical and biological weapons, not just benign stand-ins. The Department of Defense has identified nearly 3,000 soldiers involved in the test, disclosed earlier, but the VA has sent letters to fewer than half of them. The VA and Pentagon officials acknowledged at a July hearing that finding the soldiers involved in this experiment had been difficult. The tests described in the latest Pentagon documents include Devil Hole 1, used to test how sarin gas would disperse after being released in artillery shells and rockets in aspen and spruce forests. The tests occurred in 1965 at the Gersel River test site near Fort Greely, Alaska. Sarin is a powerful nerve gas that causes a choking, thrashing death. The Bush administration said it is part of Iraq's chemical arsenal. Devil Hole 2, and these devil holes are basically the names of these tests. Devil Hole 2 tested how the nerve gas or the nerve agent VX behaved when dispersed with artillery shells. The test was in Gersel River in Alaska as well, and include mannequins in military uniforms and trucks. VX is one of the deadliest nerve agents known and is persistent with the environment because it has a sticky liquid that evaporates slowly. Iraq has acknowledged making tons of VX. Big Tom in 1965 test that included spraying bacteria over the Hawaiian island of Oahu to simulate a biological attack on an island compound and used to develop tactics for such an attack. The attack used Bacillus globigii, a bacterium believed at the time to be harmless. Researchers later discovered the bacterium, a relative of those that causes anthrax, could cause infections in people with weakened immune systems. And then Rapid 10, 1, 2, and 3, a series of tests in 1967 and 68 in England and Canada. The tests used sarin and VX, as well as nerve agents taboon and suman at the British Chemical Weapons Facility in Porton, downtown England. Tests at the Suffield Defense Research Establishment in Ralston, Canada, included taboon and suman. The records show taboon and suman are chemically related to sarin and produce similar effects. So you see the extent of this bioweapons program and this chemical weapons program that the U.S. Army had, and it was testing it on people in Hawaii, people in England, people in Canada, all right, animals in Utah. These chemicals got thrown around in Alaska just to see what the effect would be. I mean, I think there's more fortuitous ways to test whether chemical or biological weapons work. There are better, smarter ways to test it than throwing it around on U.S. citizens in undercover projects. I mean, they're testing deadly nerve gases out in public. They're throwing bacteria on people. I mean, it's in clandestine ways. I mean, they're spraying down islands. They're probably flying planes over the islands of Hawaii and dumping bacteria bombs on them to see what would happen. And just keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that in the wrong hands, government power can be very problematic. It can be very problematic for people if this government power falls into the wrong hands. I mean, why are we experimenting on the United States citizens? Even today, why are we experimenting on U.S. citizens? It does not make any sense. Ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to keep an eye on these matters. We are going to close the lecture, and thank you for listening.